The cheapest water system on your property may already be built. What if the cheapest water system on your property is already built? And in places like Colorado, the law still limits how much of that water you're allowed to keep. A 1,000 square foot roof can collect roughly 18,600 gallons a year in an area that gets 30 inches of rain. That isn't survivalist fantasy, it's basic arithmetic. The Romans knew it. Bermuda still lives by it. So why were modern Americans taught to ignore the roof and trust only the pipe? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Rainwater harvesting didn't become controversial because it stopped working. It became controversial because a household that stores its own water buys less from centralized systems. And the moment water becomes a bill, every gallon you capture starts to look like lost revenue to someone. Civilizations that never separated shelter from storage. Long before municipal plumbing, treatment plants, and monthly water bills, people living in dry regions learned a rule that modern life made easy to forget. Rain isn't the resource. Storage is. A storm can arrive hard and vanish fast. If you can't keep what fell, the storm is just noise. That's why rainwater harvesting shows up in so many places that developed independently. In early settlements of South Asia, archaeologists have documented water collection and storage systems thousands of years old. Construction methods changed from region to region, but the logic stayed the same. Capture the water when it arrives, protect it, distribute it over time. By the Roman period, these systems weren't fringe technology, they were standard infrastructure. Roman villas frequently included storage systems because household water security mattered even in a civilization famous for its aqueducts, and that detail matters. Rome had large centralized systems, and it still treated local storage as intelligent design. They didn't replace one system with the other, they layered one on top of the other. That's the first big clue in this story. Ancient builders understood something many modern systems have forgotten. Resilience comes from redundancy, not from a single pipe. You can still feel that mindset in Istanbul, at the Basilica Cistern, completed in the 6th century under the Emperor Justinian. You walk underground past rows of columns rising out of dark water, and the scale of the place forces you to rethink what ancient technology means. That wasn't improvised survival gear. It was long-term water infrastructure, built with the seriousness of an empire. The same logic appears far from imperial capitals. In Bermuda, where there are no rivers and no freshwater lakes large enough to support a conventional municipal model, rain capture became part of the house itself. Stepped white limestone roofs were designed to collect rain and channel it into household tanks. Over time, the practice was written into building rules, because the island's survival depended on it. The roof wasn't just weather protection. It was part of the plumbing. In Rajasthan, India, stepwells and community rain capture systems turned storage into civic architecture. These structures were built to handle heat, drought, crowds, and the turning of the seasons. They were engineering, but they also taught a social habit. When the rain arrives, you plan for months, not for days. The names changed, the materials changed, the shapes changed. The principle didn't. For most of human history, a building that didn't help collect and manage water was an unfinished building. Which raises the question a modern audience should be asking. If all of this was normal for thousands of years, what changed so drastically that people stopped seeing the roof as part of the water system? First, the math. Before we get to the law, we have to do the math, because the math is what makes this story impossible to dismiss. Start with the part most people overlook. Your roof is already by nature a collection surface. If rain falls on it, gravity is going to take that water somewhere. The only question is whether it goes down a drain and disappears, or into a system you control. Here's the basic yield rule used in rainwater harvesting. 1 inch of rain on 1,000 square feet of roof can produce roughly 620 gallons of water before losses. Over a year, the numbers get serious fast. In a place with 30 inches of annual rainfall, the same roof has a gross collection potential of about 18,600 gallons. The word gross matters because real systems always lose part of the water. Some is diverted in the first flush to remove dust, pollen, bird droppings, and debris accumulated on the roof. Some is lost to inefficiency. Some depends on roofing material, filter design, and maintenance. But even after those losses, the remaining volume can still cover a large share of household non-potable demand in many homes. That's where rainwater harvesting stops looking like a simple backup and starts looking like real infrastructure. How the system works? The system itself isn't complicated, but every stage matters. 1, the collection surface, normally the roof. 2, conveyance, gutters and downspouts that carry the water to the tank. Poor slope, clogged gutters, or undersized downpipes can destroy performance before the water ever reaches storage. 3, screening and first flush diversion. This is where a serious system separates itself from a decorative barrel. Screens keep out leaves and insects. First flush devices divert the dirtier initial flow so the stored water starts cleaner. 4, storage. The part ancient builders understood better than most modern homeowners. A tank isn't just a container, it's a time-shifting device. It stores abundance when it rains and releases it when it doesn't. A small tank proves the concept. A properly sized tank creates resilience. 5. Distribution. If the tank sits above the point of use, gravity does the work. If not, a pump supplies the pressure. 6. Treatment. If the goal is potable use. Filtration, disinfection, maintenance, and testing are not optional. A safe drinking water system can be built, but it has to be designed and maintained like real infrastructure, not like a weekend improvisation. The comparison critics get wrong. When critics point to bad rain capture setups as proof the whole idea doesn't work, they're making the wrong comparison. The real comparison isn't a neglected barrel versus an ideal municipal plant. It's a competent system versus a competent system. And in that comparison, rainwater has clear advantages. It tends to be softer water, meaning fewer dissolved minerals and less scale in pipes, heaters, and fixtures. It often avoids chlorine taste and smell at the source because it doesn't enter the house after centralized treatment. For gardens, many growers prefer it because plants don't have to deal with the same treatment chemistry found in some municipal systems. Now add the cost side. Many U.S. households pay on the order of $1,000 a year for water. A residential rainwater harvesting system can run roughly $2,000 to $5,000 in small and mid-sized configurations, though larger or potable-ready systems can cost considerably more. So the payback question isn't abstract. It's arithmetic. How much rain do you get? How much of your demand can you realistically offset? How expensive is utility water where you live? Under favorable conditions, payback can arrive in 2 to 5 years. After that, the system still requires maintenance, but the water keeps coming without a monthly purchase order. And once you see that, the legal conflict starts to look less like a technical debate and more like a control problem. The law, property, and who owns a drop? Because the dispute was never just about plumbing. It was always about law and property, and about who has the right to claim a drop before it reaches your tank. In the western United States, water law developed under conditions of scarcity. Mining camps, farms, ranches, and growing cities needed rules to define who could take water from rivers and streams and when. The doctrine that shaped much of the region was prior appropriation, first in time, first in right. If you held a recognized water right, later users couldn't simply intercept the water upstream and pretend it wouldn't affect you. In that original context, the doctrine solved real conflicts. But legal systems built for rivers don't always adapt well to roofs. That's where rainwater harvesting collided with the modern state. Under strict interpretations in some Western jurisdictions, rain falling on private property was still treated as part of a broader hydrological system already allocated by law. The assumption was that some of that water might eventually reach creeks, streams, and rivers tied to downstream users holding water rights, and that's how the argument started to sound surreal. A drop may fall on your roof, but on paper, it already belongs to someone else. Colorado became the most famous case, because the restriction was easy to explain and hard for any ordinary resident to accept. For years, residential rain collection was heavily restricted. The state only changed course in 2016 when it legalized a limited form of household collection with House Bill 16,105. Even after that change, the state kept a narrow ceiling for many homes, 2 rain barrels with a combined capacity of 110 gallons, generally for outdoor use on the same property. That number matters. If the concern were only ensuring safe collection, the law would focus on design standards, mosquito control, overflow routing, and backflow prevention. But a ceiling that's small reveals a deeper tension. The state wasn't just regulating how you collect. It was regulating how independent that collection could become. Utah shows a milder version of the same story. Rainwater harvesting is legal there, but the state still operates within a defined regulatory framework. Utah law allows collection and use on the same parcel, and registered systems can store up to 2,500 gallons. Without registration, the permitted volume is much smaller. That's not a ban. It's a reminder that the state still sees roof rain as something to be monitored. Oregon often shows up in these headlines too, but the reality is more precise than simply saying it's illegal. The state permits rainwater harvesting from roof surfaces, and official guidance describes code compliance pathways, especially for non-potable use. The central point isn't that Oregon prohibits the practice. It's that the state defines and limits how it's handled inside the regulatory framework, including approved collection surfaces and code compliance requirements. And that pattern matters. Most modern suppression doesn't look like a dramatic ban. It looks like friction. A patchwork of storage caps, registration requirements, permits, use restrictions, code complexity, and enough uncertainty that the average homeowner concludes it's easier to stay dependent on the utility. Utilities also have their own incentives, even when their engineers act in good faith. Every gallon a household captures is a gallon not bought from the centralized system. Utilities still carry fixed costs: treatment plants, pumps, pipes, crews, testing, compliance, and maintenance. But from a revenue standpoint, Large-scale household capture changes demand patterns. And when demand patterns change, centralized planning gets harder. That doesn't mean every utility employee is a villain, but it helps explain why institutions built around metered distribution don't naturally celebrate systems that reduce that metered demand. That's the central inversion a modern audience needs to see. Rainwater harvesting didn't become controversial because it failed a performance test. It became controversial because it passed one. A household-scale system that cuts bills, reduces dependence, and stores part of its own supply isn't just a plumbing choice, it's a shift in power, what modern science found. So what happens when modern science tests this system on its own terms and confirms the ancient builders were right? That's exactly what researchers and engineers have been doing. When modern science seriously evaluates rainwater harvesting, it doesn't treat it as a lifestyle trend, it treats it as infrastructure. And tested on those terms, the ancient builders look less like traditionalists and more like engineers who got there first. A major study published in Nature Communications in 2025 modeled the global potential of rainwater harvesting for safe drinking water access and estimated that under different scenarios, these systems could contribute to safe water supply for hundreds of millions up to more than 2 billion people. That doesn't mean every roof solves every water problem. It means science has confirmed that rainwater harvesting can be a serious part of modern water security when systems are properly designed and managed. And the science doesn't stop at household supply. Researchers studying the city of Turin, Italy, modeled rainwater harvesting at both building scale and urban scale and found two benefits at once: a meaningful substitution of non-potable demand and a significant reduction in peak flows through the sewer system during extreme storms. In plain language, tanks can lower the water bill and also relieve flood pressure on urban drainage. The same roof can increase resilience on the supply side and the stormwater side. That matters more than it seems, because centralized systems tend to treat these as separate departments, separate budgets, and separate problems. Rainwater harvesting doesn't care about those categories. It captures the water once and creates value multiple times, which is why the old narrative that this method is obsolete keeps collapsing under close examination. The method is ancient, but the performance case is current, and the revival is growing because people are rediscovering both things at the same time. The revival. Some governments remain cautious or restrictive. Others have started moving in the opposite direction, treating roof capture as conservation infrastructure. In parts of the United States, public policy now offers rebates, incentives, and tax advantages, especially in drought-prone regions, where every gallon saved reduces pressure on centralized supply systems. But policy is only part of this comeback. The deeper shift is cultural. Homeowners are starting to see the house differently, not just as a sealed box that consumes utilities, but as an active system capable of capturing, storing, and managing part of its own water. Builders are designing roofs, gutters, overflow routes, and tank placement as a single integrated plan instead of treating rain collection as an afterthought. Farmers and homesteaders are pairing tanks with gravity irrigation to reduce vulnerability during dry spells. In urban areas, many families are using staged systems, starting with outdoor use and non-potable demands before advancing to more sophisticated filtration. Where to start? This is where it gets practical. You don't need to jump from zero to full off-grid water independence. In most cases, the smarter path is gradual. Start with the roof math. Measure your collection area. Check annual rainfall. Estimate how much non-potable demand you could realistically offset. Then check local codes and water rules before buying anything. This part matters because the legal patchwork is real, and the goal is resilience, not fines. If your first system is just gutters, a screen, a first flush diverter, and a covered tank for irrigation, that's still a meaningful recovery of local control. If you later want to expand into non-potable indoor uses like toilet flushing or laundry, design within code. If your goal is potable use, treat it with the seriousness it deserves: engineered filtration, disinfection, maintenance schedules, and water testing. Not fantasy independence, competent independence. That's the standard our ancestors understood and modern systems are rediscovering. Outdated. Compared to what? The strongest infrastructure isn't always the biggest system in the room. Most of the time, it's the system that keeps working when the centralized supply is under pressure, expensive, delayed, or interrupted. So when someone says rainwater harvesting is outdated, the better question is, outdated compared to what? Compared to a system that sends every drop off your roof as runoff and then sells treated water back to you at rising prices? Compared to a household model that ignores a free seasonal input and depends entirely on metered supply? Compared to laws written for river diversions being stretched to cover suburban roofs? The roof system didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared from everyday thinking because centralized infrastructure became the default. Legal frameworks hardened around control, and convenience trained people to stop seeing what their own building could already do. But the knowledge is still here, It was preserved in Roman systems, in Bermuda's catchment roofs, in Rajasthan's step wells, and now in modern engineering studies that keep confirming what ancient builders already understood. Every time rain hits a roof, that principle returns. The only real question is this: do we treat that water as runoff to be discarded, or as a resource to be stored?